I had just resigned myself to death. And I was just thinking about my family and how much I loved them, and nobody was ever going to be able to know what happened to me. And I'm telling you, the fear in me was just compounded. The first time I heard about Bigfoot or Sasquatch was when I was about 3, and my grandpa was trying to warn me not to go far from the yard. And, I didn't have any idea what he meant. And, through the years, as we got older and we'd venture into the mountains that we had there, he was like, you all got to watch out for that old man. That old man's going to get you. And he called him Old Man Lincoln. I think they got the name Lincoln from President Abraham Lincoln. And I think the reason they called him that was because one of my great grandpas was in the Civil War, and he got to meet Abraham Lincoln. And I guess he was just this extraordinarily tall, lanky guy, and he had overall dark appearance about him. And I think they named him Old Man Lincoln, for the lack of a better name. So anyway, that's what I would hear about when I was growing up. And Grandpa was a self-made man. He was they were real mountain people. And we lived here in the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia. And his folks, I think back into the Civil War, as far back as that, they were seeing these things. And a Cherokee woman married into my grandpa's family. So, then they had those blended stories with the Cherokee. But we had no idea what he was talking about. And, no one was talking about Bigfoot or Sasquatch back then. So they didn't have any terminology for it. So that kind of tells me they weren't influenced by what somebody else said. They were straight up telling the truth about what they said. And he said they would have to gather their water from a nearby spring. And that one night his grandma told him they were running late and they needed to be in the house before dark. And so they were going to run down to the spring. And apparently this thing was following along behind him or something. But anyway, she rushed him and got back home. And that night, when she was standing at the windows cleaning up after dinner and fixing the washing the dishes and stuff, the little window right there over her sink, she said this huge head, just when she looked up from her dishes, this huge head was just there in her window. She yelled out, and of course the men, I'm supposing they already knew what this thing was. And so they went outside, with their guns and were shooting up in the air and stuff to try to scare it away. But Grandpa said that, Grandma and his mom all, never would let them go wild into the woods because they were afraid it would carry one of them off. And as a matter of fact, it did get into their chickens, and I think it got a goat one time, Grandpa said. But anyway, Grandpa, by the time he was in his middle 30s, he had acquired about 300 acres of land and 3 homes on it. And my dad was the eldest son. So we lived in one of the homes on the farm, and we farmed with Grandpa. And a lot of that was mountainous. And it backs up, in addition to the mountainous area that we have, our land backs right up against a national forest. So we've got all of that. When you look at it, we just sit right down in the middle of a very mountainous area. So But anyway, my brothers and I, we used to run and play all through those mountains. We weren't afraid of anything. And I didn't have my first sighting until after I was married. And but when my grandpa died, my home place now, he deeded me some land, and I built a home on it. And I was singing professionally out of Nashville, so I was traveling a lot at that time. But anyway, as long story goes, I grew up with this guy that I ended up marrying, and he turned out to be extremely abusive. And I mean, I landed in the hospital every foggy morning. So I ended up losing my recording contract because they were afraid I wouldn't show up for a concert. And you know, that's, I mean, you'll get your pantsuit off of you for that. And so I was just too much of a risk for him. And I was pregnant. I was about 6 months pregnant. And he was drinking one day, and he got into this big argument with me. But really, wasn't the one doing the arguing. He was very verbally abusive on top of the physical abuse. And he came in that day, and I don't know what he was upset about, but I remember what it was. We both had friends that we had known all of our lives, and one of the couples had called and asked if we wanted to go out to dinner with them. And so I was trying to explain to him, you know, that so-and-so called and wanted us to go out to dinner with them. And he's like, no, we're not going, and you don't need any friends. So one of the rare times to defend myself, I spoke up and said, you've taken everything from me, and I'm not going to let you take my friends. Well, you know, I got a little smack upside the head that time, but it was more what he said. You know, he told me, because he grew up kind of wealthy, and I grew up very poor. But I got out into the world and accomplished a lot of things that I wanted to do. But he started in on me about, he knew where I come from. I had come from nothing. I was nothing. And I had gotten a phone call from the Sergeant of Arms out of Washington, D.C. He wanted me to come up and do a show. And my husband had told me I couldn't go. So that's also what part of the argument was about. And he said, you know, you're nothing. You're never going to be nothing. Only he was using extremely vulgar, derogatory words. And I wanted to tell him back, but he hurt me so deeply to think that I was married to somebody that could utter those kind of words to me. That's something that touches right in the core of your heart. And so I was ready to say something back to him, but I felt the tears coming. So I didn't want to cry, so I just turned around and walked away. I went upstairs to where I had the baby's room and everything, and I was sitting up there, and I mustered up some strength. I was going to go back down and tell him off. And when I faced him again, I felt the tears coming again, and I didn't want him to see them. So I just grabbed the keys and got in my car and went out for a while and thought I had cooled down. And I come back, and he was still wanting, you know, to assault me. So I decided I was just going to walk up in the woods. And because I did that a lot, you know, and I think a lot of people, when they want to be alone, they just, you know, they'll wander off. So I was crying and boo-hooing and going through the woods that's directly behind my home. And I guess maybe I had walked, I don't know, I guess the tree up there, I would say it's anywhere from maybe a half a mile to 3/4 of a mile. And I was 6 months pregnant at the time. So I'm walking up through the woods, and I'm talking to myself, and I'm talking to God, and I'm so disappointed, and I'm so frustrated. I'm 6 months pregnant. I don't know how exactly I'm going to handle everything, but I know I can't keep putting up with what's going on. So I finally get to a spot, this great big old oak tree in a real pretty clearing behind our home. And so I just kind of sat down in front of the oak tree, facing back the direction I had gone in. And I sat down at the oak tree and pulled my knees up against me and hid my head down in my arms, crying. And I don't know, I guess I was there 4 or 5 minutes. And I heard this noise. It was kind of like a little huff or a little sputtering, kind of like a horse will make that sound. He'll go, pfft, pfft. Well, that's what I heard. And I didn't raise my head immediately because I thought that maybe a deer had walked up on me and was snorting. That's what it kind of sounded like. But then when I raised my head, wiped my eyes, sitting directly in front of me, not very far, not very far at all, was this huge black thing laying on its belly on the ground. And it was sort of like, it was like I knew that this must be what my grandpa had told me about, and at the same time, I was just so scared, and I really couldn't like instantly. I couldn't figure it out instantly because he was on the ground, kind of on all fours, and he was just looking at me, and I can't even explain the fear that went through me. And I knew that this thing was up to no good. And I kind of, in my mind, I had decided this is the day I'm going to die. And nobody's going to know what happened to me. And nobody's going to be able to find me. But this must be the old man Lincoln that Grandpa was talking about. Of course, it's probably, the son of something of something. But anyway, he was down on all fours, and in my mind, I could hear myself screaming, but I wasn't actually screaming. And I wanted to get up and run, but I was froze. I was just frozen. And I don't understand why I couldn't get up, but that old thing, frozen in fear, that was, I can't tell you, I kind of get sick, nervous, trying to even find my words to describe. It was just pure terror when you see one of these. And there I was on top of it. I was just this little 6 month pregnant girl with no gun or anything to defend myself. And there, this huge creature that I had never in my life imagined even existed. Even with Grandpa warning me, I didn't have a picture in my head of what it looked like. But there it was, all sprawled out on the ground. And I was sitting, even where I was sitting on the ground and he was laying on the ground, he was still way above my head. That's how big he was. It was sort of like the back end of him was down lower, and he was hunkered up higher in the front. Wasn't like a flat lay down. He had raised himself up. And I've often wondered, because now he was in the direction that I had come from. So the direction I walked in, he was coming in behind me. So it's not like I walked up on him. I was already there, and he came up, I guess, while I was crying. And I don't know how something that big could come up without me hearing it, because, it wasn't like I was screaming or anything. But he looked at me, and he started to raise up. And when he raised up, he took his left hand, and he was raising up the side of that tree. And he raised up that tree, and I thought my water had broken, but I guess I peed my pants. I wasn't thinking about peeing my pants. I wasn't, but at first I thought my water had broken because I was so scared. And but anyway, he stood up, and he was leaning up against that tree, but he would kind of swoop forward and then kind of go around the circle. And he would swoop forward again and go around in a circle. And he kind of had his head tilted back. And up inside his nose was like a rose-colored pink, like a bloody looking pink, and up inside his nose. And his mouth was so big, he could have stuffed a girl's softball in his mouth and still had room. And he was popping, making a popping sound. The kids and I, when we were little, we used to stick our little finger in our jaw and go. That's what sounded like he was doing. He was just standing there going, but he was doing it with his mouth, and he had real blocky teeth, and they reminded me, because we were raised with horses and stuff, and he had those same kind of huge blocky teeth, and he grinned at me. I know he grinned at me, or he did. It stretched. His mouth stretched as if he was smiling at me or saying, I got you now. And the one thing that you couldn't avoid seeing was this bugger had an erection. My little dog sees somebody. But he had an erection. And I'm telling you, the fear in me was just compounded. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't get up and run. It was just this fear and the knowledge that I was going to die that day. This thing was going to carry me off, and I was going to die, and it wasn't going to be a pleasant death. And when he looked at me, we locked eyes the whole time, the entire time. We locked eyes. And when you look in a person's eyes, and their eyes will tell you if they're happy or if they're sad or if they're up to something. Well, this guy had that I'm up to something look. And he must have been, I would say, close to 9 feet tall. Later on, because you can't ever get this out of your mind, and you're trying to find things to compare it to. And I remember putting up some drywall one day, and I remember holding that piece of drywall, and I was thinking about him when I was holding that drywall, and I realized that sheet of drywall, he probably would have filled that whole sheet of drywall up from shoulder to shoulder. It's just unbelievable that something so human-like could be that enormously big. And he was doing that little pop, pop sound and grinning and swaying all at the same time. And I probably done rooted a hole into that tree because I couldn't get back in it any further. And the next thing I know, I'm standing there frozen with just this god awful, helpless feeling. And this big boom that shakes the ground under me and jars me, and I winced and shut my eyes when this big boom came. And when I opened my eyes, it was another Sasquatch, not not a foot and a half, 2 feet in front of me. I could have reached out and picked the hair from her leg. That's how close she was. And I had just resigned myself to death. And I was just thinking about my family and how much I loved them, and nobody was ever going to be able to know what happened to me. And anyway, I didn't know she was a she till later, but she started this walkity walk walk talk, just screaming at him. It was just echoing down through the woods. And she was just doing the scream, and he was over. I couldn't see him anymore because she was so big that her leg standing in front of me had completely blocked my view of him. And he was talking back to her, whatever they were saying to each other. And I realized that she really was bawling him out or something. It was like an old man and an old woman arguing. But she was hot mad. And I thought maybe, at first, that she had planned to kill me and didn't want him to kill me. I mean, just all kinds of thoughts went through my head. But anyway, she was mad and hurling words at him, and he was hurling words at her. And at the time, I was thinking this is like having Alvin and the Chipmunks on a really high speed. The way they talked, you could tell it was a form of communication. But they may as well be speaking Greek because I didn't understand it. But then she turned around, and that's when I noticed it was a female. And she turned completely around and looked down at me, and she was towering over me. And it was like she looked at me. It was just a look. She looked at me as like, now this is your chance to leave, so get up and go. And she turned and walked away. I didn't see any more of him, and I could not even move. After I realized they didn't kill me, I still couldn't move. And I don't even know how to explain it. But she walked away, and finally I was able to get up. And I didn't run, but I was like fast walking to get back to the house. And every now and then I'd glance over and see her. She never looked up. She just had her back to me, and she was going off in an easterly direction. And I don't know where he went. I never saw him again. I don't know if she was following the same direction he went. But I ended up going back home. And I was so shook up and so scared that I went in the house. I didn't tell anybody. And I wasn't sleeping with my husband at that time, so I just kind of went in the bedroom and laid down and bawled and cried and trying to process what I had just seen. And afterwards, once you realize you're safe, it's like, oh my gosh, I really saw that. I really saw that. But it took me months, really, to just calm my nerves. I didn't want to go anywhere. I didn't want to go outside. And, it was summer, and I'm usually out in the garden working in the flowers or doing something. And I had been working in the flowers that day. So I'm thinking maybe he had been watching me all day. Maybe. And when I walked back up into the woods, just came in right behind me. But she was so close to me. And one of the things is that she didn't have as much hair as he did. And I could see the skin in through the hair on her legs. And her kneecaps were real rough, real scaly. She didn't have any hair on those. No hair on them at all. And I could actually see little marks in places on her leg. But at the time, I guess I was seeing all this, but I really wasn't like saying I'm going to remember this or I'm going to remember that. But I remember her behind was really messy, where I guess they just go to the bathroom in the woods and, and then they're just dirty. She was really, really nasty and dirty. And her hair was probably, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 inches long. It was thicker through her back area, but the reason I knew it was a female was because she had breasts, and her breasts looked real full, as if she was nursing. So, I've always wondered, did she know I was pregnant? What made her do that? Because honestly, I don't think any of them are any good. It was like a mutant human being. It was like a mutant human being. I mean, the fear. There's no way I want to communicate with him. I saw all I needed to see. But I can't understand why. When he did grin at me, like I said, and he threw back that head, and that nose was so vividly pink, almost red. And his nose reminded me of Carl Malden's nose. It was a really big, wide nose, but it was really bulbous. And he had a very ashen, almost black skin. But she was sort of a softer black with a tinge of maybe red in it. Her face was like a plastery color, a chalky. She was a lighter version of whatever he was. But I don't know if that was the fellow she had made it with or what was going on. But if it hadn't been her, I kind of figure I would be here telling this. Yeah, well, she saved me. And I don't know why, because like I said, I wouldn't want to trust any of them. But it's just something I will never get out of my mind. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I can see the back of her standing in front of me. I can see him down on all fours. And it just comes to mind like a big old lizard or a big old spider getting ready to pounce on me. And when he was looking at me, the thing is like you have a meeting of the minds. It's like he knew that I knew that he was up to no good. And I think he was well aware that I was a human being. And I don't think his intentions were good, but I've never really felt fear like that before. And I've always been an outdoors person. I was raised in the mountains. I would go into the mountains by myself. My brothers and I both hunted. When we got up in the mornings, we weren't kids that stayed in the house. We were kids out going. And we had 300 acres of meadows and timber. And we went all over that place. Mama didn't even know how far we went. And as you grow older and the years pass and you have time to think about things, I remember sounds, unusual sounds, that my brothers and I would hear in the woods, and we couldn't identify it. But we just kind of shrug it off, and go on. And now when I look back, and we used to see tree falls, and when I started hearing people talking about the tree falls and stuff, because my brothers and I would sometimes use these trees and build a playhouse off of them. Rack up sticks and stuff and build like a little playhouse out of them. But when you get older and you start hearing about these things, and you think maybe that's what that sound was, we never could identify. But this terrified me. I didn't tell anybody. And when I got home, I did realize how awful I smelled. And it was from her. And as putrid a smell, it's like a mix of urine and feces and, like people say, dead skunk. But mostly to me, it smells like roadkill. Old roadkill that's been laying in the hot sun. And when you smell that going by in the car, it's like, oh, that stuff kind of just hits right down into the pit of your stomach. And that's what I think it smelled most like, was roadkill that had been laying out in the hot sun for a while. But I finally, I got up and took a bath, and I didn't sleep at all that night. And I didn't tell anybody for a long time. Finally, I did tell my mother. And, she thought I was crazy. But, I said, well, Mom, it must be what Grandpa was talking about. And she said, oh, I don't know. I don't know, because nobody's ever seen them. And, I did Grandpa the same way. I'm like, oh, okay, Grandpa. But when you see one, your whole world changes. It's never the same again. And from that day on, I never went hunting again. I never went for walks in the woods by myself. I would never let my children outside to play in the yard unless I was there. And they were definitely not allowed to go into the woods. But it just ruined me. And I love the mountains, because if we vacation in the States, one of my favorite places is out northwest. And that's right in the thick of them. But, I've got to be with a crowd of people. I just can't go, and how you like to go off by yourself and just be in the quiet. I don't do that anymore. I can't do that. He ruined that for me. And I think I'm still living in the same place. So in my mind, they're still here.